So hey everyone, I'm Dan Romlein. I'm one of the co-leads of SIG-UI. I'm a user experience designer at Google, and I've been involved in the open source Kubernetes project for about 2 years now, primarily operating in SIG-UI and working on dashboard. That provides some pretty good context, hopefully.
Well, I'm Jim Angel. I work for General Motors, and I'm in Austin, Texas. And I've been working with the dashboard and the team here for a good chunk of the year, I'd say. We're using the dashboard today and just looking to improve it and drive this migration forward.
Hi, I'm Rudy from Clarify. We're a dashboard user, so just interested in what's going on next.
I'm Sebastian from Lutze, and unfortunately, Marci and Sebastian couldn't make it, but now Marci and Sebastian are working for us, so and we want to heavily support the migration to Angular 2 and all the stuff in the future, and putting a lot of effort into the dashboard.
Yeah, thank you. Here, I got this.
I'm Shu Muto from NEC Japan. Hi. I started contribution to dashboard since a few months ago. So previously, few years ago, I contributed several plugins for OpenStack dashboard. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Akihito Ino. Same with him, NEC from Japan. Sorry for I just running UI and dashboard. So today's so running dashboard. Thank you.
Go for it.
Hey, I'm Spencer Sugarman. I'm a UX researcher at Google, so working with Dan on Kubernetes engine and then also supporting dashboard. I only recently got involved, so I helped out with some research that we presented at KubeCon Shanghai last month. Is that month?
Yeah. November.
Yeah. Feels like yesterday almost. That's me.
And my name is Jeffrey Sica. I work for the University of Michigan. Am I close enough to be official to say? I am also a SIG lead for SIG-UI, mainly focusing on like project management and ushering the issues through and things like that. Great. So let's start. Do you want to go over the results of the survey? I mean, we don't, like, in my opinion, we should only spend maybe 10 minutes on this and spend the rest of the time on focusing on what we want to do next year.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. I wonder if we can share that deck that has the summary. Yeah.
Can you lazy link it in Slack for me? Because then I can just open it up here.
Yeah, because we can do the 10-minute version of our talk. Dun, 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 dun. This is eating into our time, Dan.
I know, sorry, I got to connect to the Wi-Fi here, so that might be, I might just...
I think it's just, what is it?
Cloud native. I can at least, if you want to go to the PDF,
Yeah.
I can at least give the spiel about what we did.
Yeah.
So we sent out the survey that you might have seen linked in Slack and on Twitter. We had a bunch of questions about how people are currently using Dashboard and what features they're looking for in it. So this report, which we just posted to Slack, but it's also on GitHub, along with the raw results. If you want to like dig into or slice the data in different ways, you can do that. But this report kind of goes over the basic raw results that we got for each question. So we had a lot of responses. I can't remember right now off the top of my head, like 190 or something. Yeah. So we had 180 so responses from sort of people of all different backgrounds. And we asked them questions looking into their experience using Kubernetes, how much knowledge they had. Oh. We'll get back to that. You just give everyone view. Yeah, so what I'm trying to do is show the summary that we presented in Shanghai, because it kind of presents a slightly easier to digest view of this data. No. Okay. But if we go down to where is it? So if we go down to some of these questions that I think kind of talk to some functionality that's missing. So being able to see resources from multiple clusters showed up as being very important, both here just in general, and then also further down where we called out specific features to see how important those were. So we can see that definitely feature parity with kubectl came up with something. So it's being able to do more from the UI. Integration, so third-party plugins or integrations was super high. And then the third one was multi-cluster management. So being able to, I think, have sort of one single place to view all of your resources across all your clusters. Yeah. Yes. 163. It was so close. Yeah, so these came up as some of the top requested changes, and then specifically for integrations, those were cloud provider resources. So these are things like load balancers, Grafana, and then Helm. Were, those three were way far ahead of any other integrations that people mentioned. Yeah.
That was something that kind of threw me off. If anyone has input on that, I would love to hear it.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe that just speaks to some interest in having more customization. And maybe they're already doing that in Grafana, so they want to see that here. I don't know. Yeah.
It might also be talking about you can export single charts from Grafana and then have them view in different applications. I wonder if it's like a single pane of glass. So the dashboard should be that single place where you manage your cluster. I wonder if it's saying Grafana plugin, like maybe it's a link that shows up with the instance of Grafana or some sort of integration that you were talking about. So they don't have to go to Grafana, they can have it all in one centralized area.
Yeah, and then security came up again as a concern people have. I mean, I'm sure that's something new here. But some of those things that were mentioned kind of that I at least categorize as security were, I think, also new functionality. Basically, like, the more, and this might just be also covered under integration, but the easier it is for people to manage logins and access controls, the more kinds of people that will be able to use Dashboard. So, yeah, that was sort of the long and short of it. Again, the full results for each question are here, and then also the raw results in CSV form are on GitHub. I can't remember if there's anything else going out.
I was just really happy and kind of
And the other interesting thing, so he asked me questions around using dashboard for learning Kubernetes versus monitoring and managing. And just looking kind of like eyeballing the averages here, you can see a lot of people rated it useful for learning. And then that kind of dropped as you got down to monitoring, and then sort of, I think, became even lower for managing. So I think, yeah, there's definitely this interest in using dashboard as a way to sort of onboard onto Kubernetes, and also as sort of a read-only view of your resources. And then I don't know if this is the best practice, but I think there's some understanding, like, right, making changes maybe in UI maybe isn't the best way to do it. So, cool. Actually, are there any questions about any of this stuff? If not, if you want to dig into the data more, you can always reach out to me or Dan to ask more questions.
And this PDF is on GitHub, available to.
Yeah, and we linked it into the SIG-UI chat if anyone wants to get that as well. So the question 14, that was actually another interesting one for me. So, like, authentication with multi-factor, advanced disk health management tools. Like, those are very specific things, but then you have a lot of things like integrate it with Prometheus, that makes sense. Integrate dashboard with CI tools, that makes sense. I think 2019 will be the year of integrations. But I have... It's interesting to me because I feel like if we, this is both good and bad. If we make dashboard more extensible and make it possible for cloud providers to build integrations in dashboard, are we actually competing with cloud providers, Dan?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, as the project, like, if you look at what other SIGs are doing, like storage, they have completely abstracted out storage, and now, you know, they have the CSI driver. So if you're on OpenStack or if you're on AWS or you're on GCP, you have a storage driver that is, they like manage it for that cloud provider, and they're spinning out a lot of the cloud-specific stuff from the main repo and making integrations for them. And I'm almost wondering if with these integrations we could do something similar. On top of things like we need to integrate with Prometheus and have better auth, et cetera, et cetera.
Like, excuse me, what would an example of one of those be? Like, what do you think is achievable, maybe in the 2019 timeframe?
So, being able to point dashboard at Prometheus or CloudWatch, or I can't remember all the different like metrics providers for the cloud providers, so that you're hitting that one place for your historical data. So maybe if you're in GKE, you don't need to run Prometheus because everything is in, I forget the Google product. But then you can point dashboard at that, and that's where you're getting your metrics.
Stackdriver.
Stackdriver, thank you. So that kind of integration. Metrics is, you know, hot in my mind right now because of what I've been doing, but,
yeah,
you know, it's also a good example of integration.
Yeah.
CRDs was another big one. Being able to, and that kind of makes sense, being able to just show CRDs within the dashboard as well as maybe have a better way to manage CRDs in the dashboard. I think step one is just being able to view them because we can't. Now we're just kind of going through this. Let's look at the roadmap that we came up with many months ago. So,
yeah, and sorry to interrupt you. Do you
No,
want to maybe
go
share
ahead.
just kind of the Angular migration status of what dashboard, what's being worked on currently?
yeah, do you want me to do that?
I think you could probably do it better.
So I can just look in here. We are extremely close to having this done. I think Marson's goal is to have this done by the end of the year, if not early January. And
Yeah, the goal is have it done end of the year. Sebastian is now also, I think he's starting this week. So we'll see how far we can get with most of the things. I think that's the most critical part to get like to Angular 2, and then we can think about new features and implement it there.
On top of the Angular 2 migration, that will actually remove our need for, I think it's Sauce Labs. So we do this front-end test whenever there's a new pull request, and it goes through Sauce Labs, and that's why a lot of your PRs will be flaking and say that they won't work, even though they're fine. Multiple times I'm just going and hitting restart build and hoping it works. We no longer need that because of all the testing in Angular 2. So that's good at least. But based on this checklist, I think we have there's a good chance that Marcin will actually, and Sebastian will be able to finish Angular 2 migration by the end of the year, if not early January. Support for metric server. As of yesterday, I got it working completely. It is not a long-term sustainable solution, though. Having talked with Sally, who did a lot of the metric server work, he said that scraping the metrics server is frowned upon and should not be a long-term solution. So it'll probably be a stopgap until we start building these better integrations and we can point to something like Prometheus or, I already forgot, Stackdriver. Thank you. So once we finalize that and push that live, we'll at least be able to support metric server, which is a separate discussion we have to make because we need to make it an official container, which means we need a separate repo under Kubernetes SIGs. So that is something we need to action item and figure out after the conference. So those are really the two big things. There is the security PR that is hopefully going to get resolved. I know that Sebastian asked Jordan Liggett to look at it like several hours ago. Yep. And it was a minor fix. Otherwise, that is probably going to trigger a new release in like the next week. Sooner the better. We had the issue where you could press skip login, and then you could just log into the dashboard. And that's not too terrible, except then you can see all the kube system secrets. So that's a problem. They fixed it briefly by pushing, they just disabled the skip login button, but we never cut a release after that. So it was in master, and that's fine. But it wasn't, so we should have cut a release sooner. But the other thing was the Kubernetes security team suggested a much more comprehensive fix rather than let's just remove the button. So they have this much more comprehensive fix, and we're just waiting for feedback from them. And then pretty much at this point, even if the metric stuff is not solidified, we should cut a new release just to get this done and not worry about it. And at that point, I think we can just wait for the metric stuff until the Angular 2 migration, and then we'll just roll it up into a much bigger, like, version 112 or 111, I think. Yeah, so again, once this is done, we should just cut a release, have it be a security hotfix, and be like, we're on 110.1 or 110.2. I forget which version we're actually in. I think we're on 110.0. So that would be a 110.1. And then another thing that we should probably decide on is with the Angular release, and I'm just going to assume the metric server stuff happens the same time as the Angular release, would that trigger 1.11 or would that trigger 2? We were kind of talking about completely changing our versions because it is a completely different front end. It is running in parity with client Go, not with the Kubernetes release.
So would it make sense just to catch back up and release that migration with client Go, or is 110 the latest client Go?
No, so client Go runs in parity with Kubernetes. So And the whole thing with Client Go is Client Go is supposed to support the version before, the version of, and the version after. So they're on 113, we're on 110. So technically, this version of Dashboard should only support up to 111. Technically. I mean, it still works because there aren't that crazy amount of changes, but...
It seems to make sense if we were to release the NG2 migration. Sorry. It seems like it would make sense as we release the NG2 migration. At whatever state we're in, if 113 is the active Kubernetes release, then that release would kind of skip over the 111 and 112. We'd update the Go deps, and so the actual Go version in Dashboard is also in parity with that. That seems to make the most sense. I know that things have kind of lulled and gone, kind of push and pull there. Now that we're kind of getting back up on a standard release cycle, we make that jump, kind of explain that in our wiki, wherever, a little blurb there, and then continue those release cycles then. So when 114 comes out, we'd cut a 114 release and so on.
That was one of the things I wanted to talk about near the end if we had time, was actually trying to get into a release cadence that matches Kubernetes, because we are married to Client Go. Client Go updates with every Kubernetes release.
Right.
I don't see a reason why we shouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah. I think that makes sense to do the 113 and then update from there.
I totally agree there.
Cool.
Are you kind of taking notes?
I am taking notes.
Thank you
yeah.
so much.
Absolutely. These are in the just SIG-UI meeting notes
Oh,
doc.
perfect. So way up.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So we're kind of jumping around. I apologize. If anyone has any opinions or thoughts, please speak up, because I don't want us to just round robin off of each other. Yeah, go for it.
I mean, there's one question to the guys from Google. As you have now also somehow your own dashboard in the Google Cloud, what's your effort for this dashboard and how does this somehow work together?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our stance is that both UIs are good. GKE has a lot more integrations with other Google Cloud products and is better integrated with our security systems. So for those reasons, that's ultimately the direction we'd encourage people to go. I think we're thinking about the dashboard largely in its benefit for newcomers to Kubernetes and that ecosystem, so that as a day one way to learn about Kubernetes, they can use the dashboard, and it's something pretty lightweight that can run in Minikube or wherever to explore and learn about it. And so I think it's about kind of that touch point with the community and being able to support the community through that onboarding experience. Does that make sense? Can you think of anything else to add? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, answer my question. I mean, the other point for me, it's like, I mean, you saw it in the past. Now Fujitsu moved out with the development, and more or less everything was blocked or stopped for a long time. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's important, like how we get more contributors to it.
Definitely, yeah.
Because we are not, from Lutz's side, we are not Google. I cannot afford to say, okay, Marcin, Sebastian, full time doing Kubernetes dashboard. We will definitely do a lot of effort into it because we want to integrate this also more and more in our Kubernetes, and for this also like the migration is critical. But for me, the question is really like, how can we get more people involved and make it more easier that people are contributing, and potentially that people see the value also to contribute into the Kubernetes dashboard, not only like contributing to Kubernetes itself.
So I think this kind of goes back to the ability of doing integration. So like you're looking to integrate dashboard with Lutz's product. Tell me if I'm pronouncing that right, by the way. Okay. And a lot of people want integrations with their metric pipelines or their CI/CD pipelines. And if we provide a decent path to both build those integrations as well as give some example integrations, that opens the door for a lot more contributors to build stuff for their own thing that they can kind of put into the dashboard. So I think that's one good way to get contributors going. Another thing is a lot of people have concerns about the security of the dashboard, and that is something that we need to address almost immediately, besides the CVE fix. So having, and this is also in the slides and the data as well, having better OAuth support, having a better means of logging in, I think that will drive more adoption to the dashboard, which will then have more users that want to build things in the dashboard. So I think it's kind of a two-pronged approach.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that bit about supporting OAuth and other ways to log in definitely came out in the research as something that was super useful for people, or would be super useful for people. I think there are a lot of people have stakeholders that are not able to use the dashboard for various reasons right now, including security. People who they don't necessarily want to allow to change anything or even view too much, but they're just like certain things that they want their managers or executives to be able to see, and being able to support more kinds of login options would allow that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was like when we changed to the token and kubeconfig, it was first hard to figure out, okay, what config, or how do I log in now into the dashboard? Because at a certain time it stopped working, and so I was, what do I need now? Especially when I run it on GKE, because there is no, even if you use the kubeconfig, you upload the kubeconfig, and then it's like still not working. Strange. And it says, yeah, use your kubeconfig, and so I really start digging deeper into it to figuring out, okay, or looking into the documentation where it's somewhere it says, okay, you can create a service account, use this token, and all the stuff. But I think we must, fix this. That on the one side, it's a much better user experience, and that from the security perspective, you really only allow what your user is also allowed to see, and not like, okay, my user is somehow limited, but now with the token, I'm super admin again.
So one of the things that I think would be good is we focus on being able to do OAuth better, so you can just point it at a good OAuth endpoint. But then there's the matter of, great, you can authenticate, but they aren't authorized to do anything. So the next thing would be, once we have the OAuth workflow for just logging in solved and in a better state, we then focus on a way for a cluster admin or someone that has rights to then be able to easily, from the dashboard, grant RBAC roles and rights to OAuth users. Now, right now, the way that we do that is using this isn't for dashboard, but for like kubectl, the way that we do that is using Keycloak to map to different. Keycloak becomes an OAuth provider that maps to local resources. That's a fat solution for us. I'm mainly thinking like if they want to point to Google or GitHub for their OAuth provider, being able to then just map, Geef111x@gmail.com has this RBAC role in the cluster. If we can solve the OAuth and then solve that mapping in a fairly lightweight way, I think we solve like 98% of people's OAuth problems. Because I don't think, and correct me if anyone has data, this is entirely like just based on what I've talked to people about. People aren't trying to run their own auth providers on top of Kubernetes. They're usually pointing to something like a GitHub org or a like Google org. And that is their main OAuth provider. They're not dealing with like a local LDAP account or Kerberos, God help us all,
Yes, that's also the experience we do with Kubernetes. What we do there is like we're using DEX as a proxy only, and then especially like in the enterprise, everyone has like a source of like either they have LDAP or they have an OAuth provider there, and they don't want to set up a new provider. Also from security perspective, like they want to have this single button, disable this user, and then it should be automatically disabled in all the system, and not like, oh yeah, there's a Kubernetes dashboard, we have another user there, I must maintain it manually. I think somehow we need something like a proxy, like DEX, or I think for Keycloak there's also now a proxy available. And then we can, like, as an example implementation, say also, hey, you can set up Keycloak separately as your user management as a reference, and then reference also to, like, other options are GitHub, Google, and whatever. And then, you can connect this, and then it should map to the same authorization you have inside the cluster that you, the API server is using, so that you end up with the same authorization.
Yeah, I would agree with that point. I think a lot of the enterprises are using LDAP or Active Directory and want to integrate that. I do agree. There's a lot of other companies going for Google or GitHub. I don't think you're incorrect in that statement. We're personally looking at, or we are using DEX for OIDC provider right now. The issue that I've seen with it too, you talked about you disable a user in LDAP, they're disabled permanently. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't bet my firstborn on it, but I'm pretty sure that DEX right now uses custom resource definitions to store those tokens. And so once you validate once, you validate through LDAP, and that stores the token in a CRD. And so then even if you disable them in LDAP, it doesn't fix that whole life cycle of disable them in LDAP and now they're disabled in there. That's another topic for another day, but I completely agree that we're seeing this problem too, using those authentication providers there. And based on what we saw with the slides and the talk in Shanghai, was that there's a lot of questions around RBAC. Today when you install the dashboard, we say create an admin user, grab the token, throw it in there, and you're good. And the problem with that is what next? Now, what if I want a user limited to a namespace or something like that? One thing I wanted to focus on is some of the documentation, that story of how you install the dashboard and improving some of the RBAC, at least examples. Here's an example RBAC of someone limited to read only to a certain namespace, and people can take these example cookie cutter RBAC and then apply them to their cluster.
I think that would solve like 50% of people's issues that I see.
Yeah. Well, and
Seriously.
The second part of that, too, is the kubeconfig issue. And I ran into that personally. I saw, I need my kubeconfig, same problem, upload it, and find out that it's not supported X509. It wants a token. And I'm guessing that's due to the API, right? API wants that bearer token. But you can use a kubeconfig if you have your bearer token as part of your kubeconfig. So it's a little confusing.
Yeah, it's working, but it depends
how your
who is
kubeconfig.
providing you the kubeconfig. Like when you're using the default kubeconfig from Google, it has a OAuth provider in it, and so it's not working at all because there's no token in it. When you have a kubeconfig with a token, it's working without a problem, but it's not really obvious that you need a kubeconfig with a token, and that not every kubeconfig is provided or supported. The question is potentially what we also should talk with is like, can't we somehow connect the use the Kubernetes API server as for the authentication, because they have the connection to the OAuth provider. Like when you're looking to like the Google case, otherwise we must set up another one, and then it can be tricky. Or like on the Google side, you would on the GKE you would use this. You use Google logins for this, and then it's setting up someone else with GitHub, and then it's already again not matching. If we can somehow go from the Kubernetes dashboard to the Kubernetes API server and somehow get a valid chain working. I haven't looked into it, but when we get this somehow working, it would be the easiest, because then we don't must think at all into how we establish the OAuth chain, because the Kubernetes API server is already doing this, and then you can be sure the user who is available on the API server you can use the same on the dashboard, because otherwise you can already set it up that it's not mapping, and then I think you can run into problems or in confusion with customers when they say, I still cannot see something. I use my GitHub account. Yeah, because your API server is using Google account or whatever account.
Yeah, and one last thing, I agree to all those points, is definitely is that confusing user story when you're coming on board and what you can see there. Just a crazy idea, just kind of throwing it out there, spitballing, is what if there was let's assume that the efforts were done to create some sort of authentication mechanism, so you can use GitHub, you can use LDAP, Active Directory, whatever sort is done there. I think RBAC is one of those things that could be a gray area depending on your experience level with Kubernetes. It can be low, medium, and high. And going to Dan's point is this dashboard mainly drives to the people who are running on-prem. They're playing with Kubernetes. They're starting out. So I would make the assumption that the bulk of users aren't RBAC experts without going down that rabbit hole. The spitballing idea would be, what if when you log in with no authentication period, the first page you get is, let's generate an RBAC, basically drop demands. I want to see, view, create, get, or some form of plain English of what you'd want in an RBAC file. It would then generate that file or whatever. I don't know the next step of how it would generate. Then it would give you the kubectl or kubectl command to create that RBAC rule for that user you're authenticated as. Assuming you'd have a kubectl that's admin because you're creating your cluster. So you log in, you have no permissions whatsoever. It's a blank page. Hey, you need RBAC. You have no RBAC period. We let you through because you're just nobody and you're brick-walled by this RBAC config. And then the next thing is how you apply that. And they apply it, and then it works, hopefully.
Plus 1 million. Also, we only have 7 minutes left. I have to also be the moderator of this room because I signed up for it.
Yeah, do we want to get into a little bit of this roadmap and what realistically we could target after the Angular migration and what we feel is valuable? Or
So I think we should look at it as assume Angular migration and metrics are done by the end of the year. We might not have a release, but
Sure.
Start 2019 fresh. What things do we want to try and focus on in 2019? And at that point, maybe after this, we kind of figure out what's feasible, priority, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. That sounds good.
The thing that we have heard an abundance of is integration. OAuth, OIDC, RBAC. I'm just going to lump that under one thing. So I think those two things are like the biggest. But we can't forget the results of the survey, which is multi-cluster. And that surprised me, personally. And the other... So the one thing I would love to know about the multi-cluster people, and stop me if I am going off on a tangent. So with multi-cluster, are they using federation or are they looking for dashboard just pointing to 3 separate clusters? Do you know?
I think I can speak of that because I'm interested in multi-cluster personally. It's individual clusters, not using federation, not federation v2. I just have cluster sprawl and I want one pane of glass, or at the very least to be able to see a list of all my resources, jump into another dashboard from that single pane.
No, I think that's also long and short of it, as far as I understand.
I see this also because we discussed this also internally, but I think this also has quite some challenges because like currently you can sort and so on all in the Go client. If you do multi-cluster, we first must think about a concept. Okay, if I want to have the top 10 entries of 3 clusters, where do we sort? Do we have like in the middle, or do we copy the data first into a separate etcd that we can proper sort, or especially when we have a lot of entries, things like this, and you don't want to. You have 1,000 pod in each cluster. We don't want to scrape every cluster first and then like putting it up, sorting it, and then putting out 10 data out. So from my perspective, like important from our side, it's like security and integration. And I think like for multi-cluster, we should really like potentially investigate how to do this. But I think there are a lot of questions which first must be really discussed and figure out, or we really must first really understand, okay, what are the questions from the end user, what they want to achieve, and what are then the technical implications, because we had this discussion and we came immediately with a lot of points where, okay, yeah, it sounds an interesting idea, but how should we implement this in detail?
The thing that immediately comes to my mind is what happens if you have 5 clusters and they all have 5 different versions. That's probably not going to work. So, yeah. All right, so actually, let's take a vote. Who thinks, so integration versus OAuth?
I think integration.
Yeah.
I think integration is more important long term for the usage of dashboard, contributor adoption. But I think OAuth, I think that story there of getting dashboard authentication token is really messy today. And I think that the barrier to entry is a little higher for a novice starting out in Kubernetes. And I think that if we don't fix it, at least explain what you can and cannot do more clearly than just saying, here, we'll take a kube config file and take a token. Make it more clear of what exactly we need. We need a token of some sort, and then maybe links or, like I said, maybe that's not the top priority, but I think that that's a big barrier that can be solved relatively easily and then improved upon. But integrations long-term would win in my book.
I would agree. I'm also wondering if it's possible for us to make integration like our top priority and make it so all-encompassing that authentication is another integration. So eventually we could do something like LDAP as a first-class citizen as far as dashboard authentication goes. Now, there's a challenge that immediately comes to mind there, which is we're probably going to have some sort of like data store in the background that will be able to map this LDAP user has this RBAC profile. But that's not a hard problem to solve. That's just a layer of complexity that I don't think many of us want to take on. But it's also a pretty big payoff for that.
But why do we need the store? Why do we need the store to like? I mean, Kubernetes itself also don't need the store. I think I would first look into more like how we can rely on the authorization Kubernetes has, and not building another layer of complexity into the dashboard. For me, the dashboard is only like viewing the entries you can get from kubectl, an easy way to do kubectl, and so it should exactly work in the same way. And so then the authentication is the API server from Kubernetes, and we should rely on that one. The question is, how can we better integrate with that instead of using only token?
So going along the line, I totally agree too. So if someone was using Dex, then their API server is looking at Dex as their OIDC provider. When you go to log in, you obviously have to have a client app. I'm just trying to talk about the life cycle here. I don't know where that all fits in, but it'd be awesome if that, dashboard login was username and password that could then fall into Dex or whatever your OIDC provider is. Same if it was Google or something. You enter your Google username and password, it drops to your API server's OIDC. And I'm oversimplifying here, but just kind of envisioning, like you were saying, we don't want to support that layer, but we want to kind of integrate it, So, yeah, plus $1 million.
Yeah. And I don't know, Shu or anyone else in the room, I want to make sure we give everyone a chance to.
There's one person behind you.
Hey, did you have a?
I'm going to try to give a user's perspective. So sorry. So from like an admin point of view, so what our company does, kind of like it's standard Kubernetes, nothing super crazy, but like again, there's a bunch of developers, and we don't want to give, we actually want those developers to actually be able to use the dashboard, of course. So for us, the number one problem is the integration and the authentication thing. Right now, what we do is, run this command, refresh your kubectl token, and then grab that token and then paste it here. But that token expires every one hour, of course, so that it's kind of like you have to do this over and over again and everything, right? So for us, integration into the API server's authentication mechanism is, to me, is number one priority for solving that. Plus, like, I don't know whether you guys discussed this before. Sorry, I came in late, but like, to me, like, we also may want to have like kind of like a policy or something inside the dashboard where like you can say dashboard can only be used with your permissions when you log in minus edit permissions or minus viewing secrets, right? So which means that you can see resources, see logs and everything, but like as an admin can take away your edit permissions or whatever for the dashboard because like we want to keep doing the declarative style and everything, and then not doing things through UI and not seeing secrets through the UI seems way better than kind of like having all of the users having those permissions and everything. So just an input point.
One question to this. When the developer has added access on kube control, is this a case, or would it be like, okay, the developer don't have added access at all?
Yeah, actually, the developers will have added access in, like, let's say, development clusters and everything. But like, this is more like we don't want people to actually go into the habit of like editing resources in the dashboard and everything, and then not reflecting those changes back into the source code. That's just for those kind of cases. Yeah, yeah. To me, it's like the RBAC of whatever you have in the kube control is your RBAC, right? If you can add it, you can add it.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Okay, this I was wondering if you want additional airbag that you can say, okay, I want to. On kube control, I have added access, but in the dashboard, I don't have access.
Yeah, exactly. So dashboard is just like V1 kind of thing.
But I think from my perspective, it would be at least a good starting point to say, okay, we're matching the airbag permission. What you have at kube control, you have in the UI, and then we are already like a lot of steps further as we are now.
Yep. All right, we are technically 3 minutes over. We do have to vacate in 5 minutes, so I would just like to say thanks everyone for coming. We should keep this conversation going in the SIG-UI Slack or the SIG-UI mailing list, but Slack's a lot more active usually. Yeah, Slack's very active. All right, thanks everyone.